Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. I had a question or a request by Reham earlier to do a series maybe on the liturgy and see where we go with that. And I hope it will turn out to be a discussion more than homilies and sermons. So how do we see the liturgy? What's this liturgy of ours that we come to do, which is significantly characteristic of the Orthodox and the Catholic Church? And you would have no similarity in the other Christian denominations, but mainly their focus is the worship, praise, prayer, the Word of God. So why the liturgy is so significant, and why when this started I was very sad and depressed almost, because I knew that there will be no liturgy which gathers all of us. And you're going to see from our study, it is one essential element that makes us. I want to tell you this story from the 2nd century in Algeria, where a group of Christians were caught by the soldiers doing a liturgy in a home of a Christian person. And the head of the police that went to confiscate the house said to the owner, "Don't you know that the governor had banned you from doing these meetings? And it's a crime to gather as Christians." So the end of it, actually, that this group was executed. They were all martyrs at the end of it. But the answer of the owner of the house was like this. He said, "Don't you know that Christians cannot live without the liturgy? Because Christians celebrate the liturgy, and the liturgy makes the Christian." This is how essential. It is not everything we do, but it is the heart. When you sever the heart, when you pierce the heart and stop the heart, the whole being dies. But the heart is not everything. So this story highlights the thought of the traditional church, the church as Christ started it in Jerusalem in the upper room. This is the church. That is the church. That's what makes the church. So I want to say the theme or the idea that makes our understanding of the liturgy easy or easier, because it's a mystery at the end of the day and it's not going to be completely comprehended, but the one that actually gathers almost all the threads of this tapestry, which we call liturgy, is the theme of a meal celebrated by the family. So it's a family meal. A family meal. In the West in general, people gather in traditional times. People gathered around the table, a father, mother, kids, grandfather, grandmother, and especially you see this in Thanksgiving or in Christmas. The two famous occasions where people actually gather to eat a meal together. That in it, it's a rich meal where everyone is looking for the food, of course, but more than the food, there is something about those two meals that make them very special and make them feel their family bonds. It's a meal, but it's more than a meal. And they require, at the beginning of it, in a regular Christian family, they say, classically speaking, they should say grace. Say grace. Okay. What's grace? Grace is a word, has a Latin root, gratia, and in Spanish they say gracias. What's that? in language. When you ask a person, and if a Spanish person says gracias, what does he mean by that? Actually, he means thank you. So it seems like at the root of this word, grace as a gift from God and thanksgiving is two faces to a one coin, is actually very closely connected. The gift of God and our thanksgiving is one and the same, which is not far from the East use of that word regarding the liturgy. So when you ask a Christian, an Orthodox Christians, what's a liturgy? He would say, this is the Eucharistic gathering. Okay, what do you mean by Eucharistic gathering? That's the Greek counterpart of gratia. He says Eucharistos is thanksgiving. Is that all he said? You would ask, and they would say no. Eucharist is actually the gift, what we share in the Eucharistic gathering. So the gift and the action, we use one word that actually describe both of them. The meal, which is the Eucharist that we partake of, and the action of thanksgiving. So it seems in the East and the West, every Christian agreed, primarily and anciently, and from the beginning, that the action and the gift cannot be separated from each other. What's the gift? Is the Eucharist. What's the Eucharist? Is the body and blood of Christ. But what is the action? It's thanksgiving. So what do you call it? Eucharist. Okay. And in the West, you would say the action is a grace. Gratia, grace. And what's the action? He would say gratia. What's that? Thanksgiving. So when we come to the church, we practice thanksgiving, and in return, the Father, the Heavenly Father, give us our food, our bread, and we mix the food the Father gives us with our thanksgiving. So this image of a family meal that we come together to share, and the Heavenly Father is the one who presides over that table, as you have the image of the family with the grandfather or the great person in the family sitting at the head of the table, and the house of the grandfather or the biggest house of the family offers the meal, and everyone in that family that belongs to this line comes together on that table, and they can invite guests and other people, but mainly it is the family gift that they share. And then there's warmth, there's love, there is exchange of gifts, there is hugs, there is talks over the meal, and there's a sense of joy, a sense of community, a sense of belonging. Yeah, I belong to this table, I belong to those people. I really do, and I'm happy to be part of this family. That's how a person feels as they sit on that table. Therefore, many theologians and people who study this, they said the most perfect image of the Eucharist that actually gives us a deep insight into it is the image of the Passover, of the Jewish Passover. And for this reason, we're going to go a little bit into the Passover and see the images of this common meal that everybody comes to. But it's not just a simple meal. It's ordained by God as their Father. And then it saved them. The meal of the Passover was a meal of salvation. So you add that one more dimension to the meal, which is a common together. It's grace from God. But this grace is beyond filling the stomach. It's beyond satisfying hunger. It's beyond a common thing that people do together. It's actually an agent, a tool of salvation. And that's why I think I want to start this time by looking into the Passover, because if we didn't really see the Passover, then I will have a big missing chunk of our studying of the liturgy. So this time we're going to look into the Passover as our start of study, and maybe we'll spend maybe this time, next time, on the Passover just to kind of get the story, the idea. So can we go to chapter 12 of maybe it's going to be 11, 12, 13, one of them. So 12, let's go to 12, chapter 12 from the Coptic reader, and look at the Passover. It was the month of April, the month we're in now, and it's very suitable because I'll tell you, this is what Jesus did. He linked this Passover to our Passover. Now, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt when they were still slaves over there. And this was the last of the plagues. And he said, "This month shall be your beginning of the month." Now, April in the Hebrew calendar is Nisan. Nisan is the 4th month, number 4. But God wanted it to be the beginning. And the reason why, because history for the Jews begins with their exodus, with the day they leave Egypt. So that month will be the 1st month. It shall be the 1st month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, you come on the 10th day of Nisan. It's a lunar month. Starts with the moon appearing on the sky and ends up with the moon disappearing. So the 10th of this month, 10 days from the beginning of the lunar cycle, every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of the persons. According to each man's need, you shall make your count for the lamb. So the beginning, you take a lamb, and it's going to be the food for the family. And everybody will count how many members in his family. You might have 6 kids, you might have 3 kids and 4 grandchildren, and so on. So you would count how many portions of the lamb a person might take, or how many portions from the lamb the house will take. And then you find if you're going to have one lamb, or you're going to have to share that lamb with some other house, neighbor house. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the 1st year. They say, I'm not an expert on sheep, that a lamb in 1 year completes its internal organs development. A lamb of 1 year is almost like a mature lamb. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, but it has to be without blemish, means there's no spots of sickness, skin diseases, broken limbs, deformed limbs, missing an eye, etc. That's not acceptable. It has to be perfect. Now you shall keep it from the 10th to the 14th day of the same month. You have to bring it in the house on the 10th day, and they keep it from the 10th to the 14th. And I wonder, why would they ask, where God asked to do this? If this lamb is to point to Christ, then Christ is one of the members of the family. He's not a foreigner. He didn't come out of nowhere to the world all of a sudden, and on the same day he ascended the cross and was slain. He had to be familiar. People had to know him, had to come in touch with him. The whole Jerusalem had to see him in the place where he would be crucified. So he had to come to the world and live in the world, and the world has to be familiar with him. And you notice that he came to Jerusalem actually on the 10th of Nisan, which is Palm Sunday. And he stayed in Jerusalem, didn't leave until the cross on the 14th of Nisan. So what's the 10th? First day, 11th, second day, the 12th, third day, 14th, fifth day, 5 days had to stay. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. Now, when he speaks here, he speaks as if they're going to kill one lamb. But actually, in actualities, they are killing each house a lamb. But then God looks at it and they say, when all they will do it all together at the same time, as if they're killing one lamb and they're all sharing it. And then come the theologian looking at this and say, of course, because it is many lambs, but they all are pointing to the one person. So that one lamb that will be killed today or maybe a month ago is actually the same lamb that the Egyptians or the Israelites killed in Egypt. They have to all partake of that one source, one species. So they have to kill it all together at the same time, every generation, and it seems like it's the same thing. They're all sharing in the same thing. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat it. Its blood is very important. You know, usually when people kill to eat, you go to slaughterhouses, they dispose of the blood. It's not necessary for anything. So what they need to do is to paint the two doorposts, meaning the standing up sides of the door, and the one horizontal beam at the top, on top of those two beams. They shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire, with unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. And this is the main process. They might not need to paint the door with the blood again in the next generation or the generations until today, but they will have to. They will have to eat. I guess the rabbis had given some excuses later, but then, and if you ask people in the times of Christ, can a person be vegetarian and not eat the Passover? The rabbi would say absolutely not. If he is a vegetarian or vegan or a pescatarian or whatever, they have to break the rule on the Passover. They would have to eat the lamb. With unleavened bread, and this is the beginning of a feast called the Unleavened Bread. This is a parallel feast. The Passover is the first day. With bitter herbs, they shall eat it. Today they use arugula. I know that the Jews use arugula for bitter herbs. And they say, do not eat it raw, nor boiled at all with water, but roasted in fire. Its head with its legs and its entrails. You shall let none of it remain until the morning, and what remains of it until the morning you shall burn with fire. That's a similarity with the manna when we talk about the manna later. And thus you shall eat it, with a belt on your waist in a hurry, your sandals on your feet, prepared to leave. This is an Exodus meal, a meal that will set them free, a meal that will let them go from Egypt, and they will never have to come back. And your staff in your hand. So you have a belt, sandals, and staff, a person ready to walk a journey. So you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. What's that? It's a reminder. Don't think it is a meal like any other meal. This is God's meal. He's giving you this meal so that he can set you free. For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night. That's the explanation. And will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Now, why did I ask you to do the blood? The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. That blood should be left on the doors. And I can imagine when they left their houses, just this image is stuck in my mind. When they left the houses in Egypt, they left houses empty and blood on the doors. And this, how they left. So these streets with the lines of houses in it, the Jewish houses where they lived, has a peculiar thing on it. Blood. Looks like a letter pi, two vertical lines and one horizontal line marked with blood. So this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. And that's true, because whatever happened to that feast is continued in our church. We are keeping it. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. After that, so the first one is the Passover. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from that first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. And he said that the feast of the unleavened bread on the first day shall be a holy feast, convocation. On the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation. No manner of work shall be done on them, and that's the Sabbath rule. But that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you. So you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread. For on this same day I will have brought you armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. So this is what God had commanded to be done. That's chapter 12 in Exodus. It's a meal. And the specifics of the meal is given by God. It's not left to anybody to conjure what's to be done with the meat or how they should eat it. It's not. God gives all the details of it. And he gives forbidding from boiling or keeping to the next day. When the rabbis saw this, they said, wait a second. We are going to celebrate Exodus. We might as well, as our ancestors did, keep the feast with reading and look at the promises that God has given. So they looked into it and they said in chapter 6 that God spoke to Moses and gave him 4 promises. So when you go to chapter 6, in 6, therefore say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I am the Lord. When he says, I am the Lord, the rabbi says he's sanctifying us by his name. I am Adonai means sanctity. So they keep that as the first promise. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptian. That's the second promise. I will rescue from their bondage. And then the third promise, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgment. That's the third. And the fourth one, I will take you as my people and I will be your God. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will bring you into a land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So they say there were 4 promises, and the 4 promises is the following in chapter 6. The first one in verse 6, I will sanctify you. The second one in 2 phrases, I will judge the Egyptians. Then the third one in 1 phrase, I will save you or redeem you. And the last one is, I will take you as my people. They call it consummation, to consummate that covenant. So the first one, and then when they go to the Passover, they divide the meal into 4 sections. The first section is called the section of the sanctification, and they drink a cup of wine at the beginning of it. They call the cup of Kadush, sanctification. And they start eating the bitter herbs and the matzo, the unleavened bread. Then they drink a second cup, and they call it the cup of judgment, which happened to the Egyptians. And then they eat the Passover lamb with the unleavened bread. And then they drink a third cup, they call the cup of salvation. And after that, something very interesting the rabbi did. They said, wait a second, the unleavened bread represents us. It's our body. It's our family. It represents us. When we break that bread, we're actually remembering our ancestors who were our flesh, living in Egypt under the persecution of the Egyptians, the taskmasters, and their whips. So the unleavened bread, the matzah, have bruises from the oven, and that represents to us the bruises that the taskmaster inflicted on our ancestors' flesh. So we're going to take one piece of this matzah, and we will hide it to remember that one of us, a flesh of our flesh, has not yet been revealed, and we await him, the Messiah. So after they drink the third cup, the cup of salvation, they do a little game. And the Passover is a very, if you really study it, it's a very amusing, very deeply put together, deeply thought of ceremony. And they call it the Passover Cedar. And they do this to get the kids engaged. So they hide the piece of the matzah wrap it in a linen cloth, and they hide it somewhere, and they send the kids looking for it. And the child who gets it in the middle of the meal gets a prize, usually money. And the father of the house would say to the child, finding this is like finding the Messiah. Whoever finds him will have a prize from God. So that's the third part. It seems like the third part that Jesus used for his body. And then the fourth one, they drink the fourth one, and remember the fourth promise, the consummation promise. I'll take you as my people. And they sing psalms. They call it the Halil, the psalms of joy at the end of their meal. This is the meal. How does the meal start? Traditionally, there is a scripted language for the Passover. It's scripted. It's not left to be eaten and just offer a toast or something. No, they have to say certain things. So it starts with the child, the youngest child, doing his part, and he starts the ceremony of the meal. And the child would ask, why this night is different than any other night? And the oldest person in the family would say, this night is different than any other night because on it, we stopped being slaves. We were freed. Our slavery ended. Another child might ask and say, but we were never slaves. We were never slaves in Egypt. And the grandfather would say, but if our ancestors had not been freed by God from the bondage in Egypt, we would have been today slaves in Egypt. So, and the rabbis go into different ways of how the responses of the kids would be and what it means. But that is the beginning of the meal. It's scripted. So sometimes the kids would say, and all the nights we sit at the table, or sometimes we recline, but why on this night we only recline? And other nights we don't dip our bread. And in this night we have to dip our bread. What I mean is there's a lot of questions and answers, discussion, responses, singing. They come to the judgment, the second cup, and the kids will act the plagues. They take a drop of grape juice and put it in their plate and say locusts. And they take another drop of grapes and they would put it in the plate and they would say gnats. And they would take another one and say boils, and so on and so forth. And so act out the plagues, the 10 plagues of Egypt. Because that Passover kind of consummate and ends and conclude the plagues. So they remember all the things that happened in that Passover. So in this meal, I can summarize. In this meal, it's not just to be eaten. It's actually made for memory, to commemorate, for generations to come, to remember. So the ingredients of this meal is not just to eat, but also to remember, and also to offer thanks and to praise God for his great salvation that he has done. So you're going to have those three actions in our Eucharist too: the remembering, the offering, and the receiving. The remembering our great salvation that was made by God through His Son. The offering is that we offer the elements of our life, which means in the Jewish, they would have to take a lamb and they would offer the lamb. They would have to take the matzo and offer the matzo. They'd have to take the wine and the marur and the vinegar, and they would offer it on the table. What would they receive? They would receive their freedom, their life, their identity, the blessing, and the protection of God. So they would be the three elements again: offering, receiving, and remembering. Remembering in all kinds of manners, in words and in action. In words and in action. They will remember the story, they will read the passage from Exodus, and they will sit at the table as they eat as one family, and they will recite the story, and they would ask about the story and what happened, and memorize pieces of it, and just immerse themselves as if they are living it. And to the degree that one of the phrases they would say in the second cup, I think they would say, "This year we are slaves. Next year may we be free," which is spiritually recited to talk about the slavery to sin or bondage to habits or any of it. So this is a tool to free us, not just as the Israelites physically, but it's actually to free us spiritually. I'm going to stop here. This is this weekend how I thought it would be good to start talking about something from, if we don't get the Passover as the Gospel of St. John, chapter 6. The grace meal. The theme is we will have the gift of the body and the blood of Christ, what it means to the church as Christians. All right. If you have any, we continue from last week, and I would quickly remind us that we started talking about the liturgy next time as the prayer. I pray that the Eucharistic prayer, the Eucharistic liturgy. Enjoying. And we talked quickly about the words we use in the West and the East, how the theme that we picked is the family meal. And not any family meal, it's a special meal when the family come together and they celebrate a feast like Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter. And in the East, it would be more the Christmas and the resurrection, more of the resurrection feast. And they gather and they enjoy the company of each other and the good food. And around the table, they will be talking and connecting and kind of exchanging some very warm words. And we said this has an icon in the Old Testament, the predecessor or the origin of all these family gatherings depicted in the life of Israel in the Passover meal. And we started talking about the Passover meal. And we read the passage, and we said the elements of the Passover meal was a lamb that was barbecued, not boiled in water or cooked with anything else. It's actually barbecued alone. Had to be without a blemish. That was the main course. It had to be accompanied by unleavened bread, and this will be the focus of our discussion today. And we talk about the unleavened bread and what it means. And then they had 4 promises given to them by God as their father. Since it is a family, and the meal is the family meal that will save them. It's not just any meal. They're not sitting there in the first time to be done, just to enjoy the food. That meal, will be the source of their salvation from slavery and their redemption from Egypt. And we talked about the 4 promises that God gave. The first promise, the sanctification promise, I am God. And when he said that, the rabbis understood that he is sanctifying them. And to remember this and to commemorate this, they would drink 1 cup of wine called the cup of sanctification, the cup of Kadush. Today, I'll try to share with you a little YouTube video clip, and it's a movie that I recommend that everybody watch. It's called Messiah Prophecy Fulfilled, produced by a company here in Charlotte, I think. It's a very well-made documentary, or not documentary, a little drama, but it documents the first century Passover meal. The second cup would be the cup of judgment. He said, I will judge the Egyptians with like mighty hand. I will do things in Egypt that nobody have heard about. And for that, they drink a cup called the cup of judgment. And with each of those cups, they say a thanksgiving prayer or a prayer of thanksgiving to God. The third promise, which is commemorated by the third cup, when God said, I will save you, they call it the cup of salvation. And the fourth cup, they call it the cup of Halil, or the cup of praise, which reflects the fourth promise when God says, I will gather you to myself. And those cups divide the Passover celebration, the Passover meal, into 4 sections. It always begins the section. So the first cup of sanctifications begins the eating of the matzah, which is the unleavened bread, and the marur, the bitter herbs. And then the second cup begins the eating of the Passover lamb. And the third cup is after the Passover lamb and before the Halil, which is the praise. And the fourth one is the praise. And then that concludes the Passover. It goes on for hours. The Passover meal goes on for hours. And there's a script. It's not left to people to say whatever they like. There's a script. By the first century, there has developed a script for it, and a discussion that goes back and forth, and singing and praying and some actions. When the language is written of the Passover, it's written about almost like talking about one lamb. When we read Exodus 12, Moses told them, you bring a lamb for a family, and if the family is small of a lamb, you kind of agree with your neighbor to bring a lamb for the 2 houses. And then when he goes to say, talk about the slaying of the lamb, the sacrificing of the lamb, he says, at twilight, all the congregation of Israel will kill the lamb. And here speaks in the singular. And the rabbi understood that this, although it is many lambs and many houses, it is acted out as one house and one lamb, which made the rabbis also transfer this to the generations to come, and they would say, the salvation that God has made in Egypt for the Israelites is pertaining and very important to all generations. And every generation who would come to do this will consider the Passover meal their salvation, their act. So today, when a Hasidic Jew or a zealous Jew celebrate the Passover, they will celebrate it as if he's going out of Egypt today, in the day of his Passover meal. The Passover meal has elements of unity. The family has to be together. They shut the door, and they celebrate their separation from the world, from Egypt. And that's why the beginning of all the promises, I will sanctify you. And it says, I'm the Lord, and you are my special people. And he's going to repeat that when he makes the covenant in Sinai. So that family is a special family. And the beginning of all the celebration is to separate that family, to take it out, to make it set apart. So this is the beginning of the celebration. And remember last time we said in every item of the Passover, in every stage of the Passover, there are 3 things to be done: to remember or to live again, to commemorate in life or a living memory, and to offer the elements of the Passover with themselves. They offer their own flesh and their own life to God so that God will take it and adopt it and become His family. And the third one is to receive from God the sanctification, the judgment, the salvation, and the gathering. So in every step of the Passover, the three actions: the remembrance, the offering, and the receiving. Keep that in memory. And also the other things that we want to remember, that in all the Passover celebration, there is words mixed with actions, not just words. They're not just there to say prayers and sing songs. They're going to do things. And that's why it is acted out by food, by actions, by reciting words, by reciting stories, by asking questions, by answers. Today we want to focus on a very significant step. And that significant step is the preparation. In the preparation, in the Gospel of St. Mark, Jesus sends two of his disciples, I think it's Peter and John, to the city. He was in Bethany. He sent them to the city, which is Jerusalem, and told them to go to a certain place, a certain house. When they knock on the door, they ask for the owner of the house, the head of the household. And they would tell him, where is the place where the master would eat the Passover with his disciples? And Jesus gave them specific instruction. He will show you an upper room furnished. There, he said, prepare for us to eat the Passover. So he gave them a specific instruction about the place where to be done. He didn't leave it open. He didn't say, just bring us the lamb, bring us the matzo and the wine, and we'll do it under this tree or in any house in Bethany or with Mary and Martha. No, he gave them a specific place. In the church canons in the New Testament, it is the bishop who decides where the liturgy that should be celebrated. And that's from the 2nd century, talking about the apostolic, they call it apostolic constitution. The apostolic constitution of the church specifically says the priest and the congregation needs to refer to the bishop to ask him, where should we celebrate the liturgy? So he would designate the place for the church. That's why we invite the bishop to consecrate the altar. And sometimes when the church congregation don't have enough means or a land or a building, they ask the bishop, and the bishop would consecrate a plate, a wooden plate, and that wooden plate will be given to the priest, and the bishop would say, okay, go find a place. You don't have to have me, drag me with you everywhere, because I have other churches and it can be difficult for me to go look for a place with you. So they give the priest, and he would kind of delegate to the priest the choice of the place. Sometimes, and I've done this many times, and many other priests have done it, when we go into a new congregation somewhere in the States or even in Egypt, and they have no building. So we go rent a hall in a hotel or a school or even another congregation, religious building like a church. We go there and take that plate, and that plate tells all of us it is the bishop who is accompanying us in that plate and to celebrate the liturgy where it needs to be. That's what Jesus had done with the apostles, and that's what we do in the church today. The other preparation thing that we need to pay attention to, which is very significant and has a lot of significance in the New Testament, it's kind of, you hear its echoes all over the place, is taking out the bread from the homes. When the word used for this step, the translation in English was leaven. Take out the old leaven, the old yeast. Just mentioning yeast evoke a memory in my mind when I was young in Upper Egypt. in the countryside where I used to go visit my grandma, and I used to stay with her for many days. One of the most enjoyable things that I ever looked for and I wanted to do is to wake up like at 3 a.m. in the morning or 4 and start baking bread with my grandma. I mean, today nobody does this in Egypt. It's done. These days are gone. I was lucky enough to witness the last of those days. She had a handmade brick and mud oven on top of the roof of her house. And she used a big bowl of clay, like that big, to put the flour and the yeast and the water, and to knead it by hand. There was no electric kneaders at the time. It was like not invented yet. You know, that's how ancient I am. So we would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. One thing I noticed that she already have a little plate, maybe like that, and had yeast in it. What's yeast for her? It was a very little piece of dough, soft dough covered, that she had. She maintains in the home, you know, perpetually. She always have that yeast. She knows where she's keeping it. And I asked her, Grandma, where did you first got that yeast? She said, I got it from my mother. And where did she get it? Maybe from a neighbor. And where did the neighbor get it from? From their neighbors, and from their grandmothers, and from their mothers. And that yeast is a living thing that lives with them every single day. So in the morning when we wake up, she already had, how she does the yeast. It's almost like making yogurt, if you're familiar with this. You take a little bit of the old yogurt and put it in a cup of milk, and that milk will ferment and become new yogurt. So you eat most of it and leave a little bit for the next day, and you do the same over and over and over and over and over again. Same thing with the leaven, with the yeast. There was no Walmart, there was no Heisteter, no stop and shop. There was the idea of dry yeast even is not known. It's all wet, doughy yeast. So she would take that yeast and put it in a cup with a little bit of sugar, and put it like where next to the burners. We had like kerosene lights and kerosene burners. So they would warm up a little bit, and you start seeing the miraculous rising of the dough. And she would take that dough, and then she would put it in the water, and then she puts the measure of flour, and she would start kneading. I was young, so I used to help a little bit, but my hands get tired, and I would let her continue and finish. And then by maybe 8 o'clock, the process will be finished, and we'll start cutting the bread into loaves, and then we put it on clay plates like this, put it in the sun for a couple of hours. It takes its time to rise. And then the oven will be ready. My grandmother used to put a lot of hay and some of the waste, that dry waste that she puts on top of the roof in a hot climate. It dries and becomes fuel for the oven. And we will start baking the bread. Bread comes out, smells fantastic. You can smell it from like 2 streets down the neighborhood. So I understand that idea of the leaven. The leaven, it's a living thing, something that has the potential, very important, that has the potential to propagate, and it doesn't stay still. So for example, you put a little bit of leaven like this, Jesus said in one of the parables, and you hide it in the flour and with the water, and the whole flour patch, the dough, will become leavened. And then all what you need is a little bit from that leavened dough to make a new patch, and so on and so forth. We read in the book of Exodus and in Deuteronomy, I'm going to just go back and refresh our memory, how, you just do that, I will share with you the screen, how they will start by taking out the old leaven. Let me go back to the chapter 12 from Leviticus. I'm sorry, chapter 12 of Exodus. We're going to Leviticus too, but in description of the Passover, when he talks about the day, right, and so this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generation. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. It was a very strong commandment. You know, God told Moses to do this, to take the leaven out. So the question is, why is this so significant that they start celebrating the Feast of Unleavened, they call it the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and they do this for 7 days. And Leviticus, I think it's chapter, is it 23? Yeah, these are the feasts and the convocations, they call it feasts. And then he goes to talk about the 14th day of the first month at twilight is the Lord's Passover. And on the 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread to the Lord. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. Okay? So they did this. They are doing it all the time. I'll show you a little clip, if I can, of the movie and see if we can do this and you can hear it's not nothing. The head of the household is searching for the bread, the old bread in his house. It's a ritual they do. He knows where it is, but he has to go with a torch, with a light, around the house, examining the house, see that he has gone. And he's saying a prayer. So they put some bread for him in the cupboard. He takes it, puts it in a paper, a piece of paper, and he threw it in the fire. And he's saying a prayer. He says, Lord, the leaven that I had in my house, that I did not see, consider it as the dust of the earth. So it is a ritual. He has to go through the house and examine the house, look for, and you saw that he has a torch in his hand and he was going around looking for the old leaven.
We're gonna start over.
Okay, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to go to the New Testament and see. So this is what the Jews would do and the Israelites would do according to the commandment of the Lord. And after he finished, usually the women do the job, and they were making that point in the movie that the women make the preparation for the Passover and the men takes the credit in a patriarchal community. So that they made fun of this point that grandfather have to feel his place as an important person in the family. So they give him a hint where the old bread is. So he takes it, puts it in the paper, threw it in the fire, and he says a prayer, Lord, whatever leaven that is still in my house and I'm not aware of, consider it as the dust of the earth. Let me just ask the question. So what does leaven mean? Why would God say, just don't celebrate that feast with the leaven, with an old yeast? Imagine and just think with me, as if you can, going to the first Passover when the Israelites were living in Egypt. How did they live? What did they think? How did they behave? What customs they are used to? What feasts they used to celebrate? What's good and bad for them? They were born there. There were 4 generations, at least, or 5 generations in Egypt. since Jacob brought his children to Egypt. So, like any immigrants, like any group of minority in a big country, what will happen after 2-3 generations? They will become the same breed, the same kind of people that they are in the land they are inhabiting. They call this in sociology assimilation, right? Assimilation. So what does leaven mean? Leaven actually is a common thing that is shared by all the neighborhood. Like I told you, they don't bring it from a grocery store. It's not imported from other country. It has to be done locally. It's a living thing. Grain, food, you can bring it from far away. You can dry all kinds of vegetables and fruits and bring it from across the continents. But leaven, it has to be grown locally. Nobody's going to go all the way across the ocean to bring leaven. It has to be done locally. It's simple and it's shared. So leaven represents the food or the life pertaining things that has to be common among a certain culture. That's how the rabbis understood it. So when God separated his people, the first action of separation, and he sanctified them, he kind of tore them out of the fabric of the Egyptians. He took them out and made their stay there impossible. If you notice, every time Moses goes to Pharaoh, the reaction of Pharaoh and the leaders in Egypt is by making the life of Israel even worse. And even to that degree that other leaders in the community of Israel told Moses, you're ruining our life here. Every time you go to Pharaoh, he makes it harder and harder for us. He used to kill our children, now he's killing us. Then at the last plague, there were total separation. There was this image. Just imagine that with me. There are actually each in their houses, scared to death, closing the doors and eating this very peculiar meal together. And outside is death roaming the streets and killing. And after that, cries and screams from everywhere in every corner in Egypt in a dark night. And they are supposed to get out in that moment and get out and never come back. So this is how God separated them, and leaven has to complement this picture. When Jesus went the last week of his life on earth, went to Bethany and raised Lazarus from the dead. And the leaders in Israel said, this man has to die. We cannot allow him to live. And we have to stomp all his teachings. We have to take it out completely. You can sense the fear and the tension in the life of the apostles. When Jesus gathered them in the upper room and they closed the door, they understood and they got something from his talk that there is going to be a big separation. There's going to be a big enmity. But they didn't understand the extent of it until Jesus was taken to the cross and was killed. You see a little bit of it in the trial, when Jesus was tried before the high priest. And Peter is trying to follow, but then there is this tone. You are one of his disciples. Okay, so now not just the leaders, even the servants of the leaders and the community in Jerusalem, they understood they are not the same. They're separated. They're different. They are following this new rabbi who teaches something very different. So there is a separation already happening. Jesus had actually walked them out of the Israel community. He had separated them. And when Jesus is crucified, they go into the upper room and they shut the doors and they're hiding. They're terrified. You see this again, even after Pentecost. When Peter was imprisoned and the angel came and freed him, he comes back to the upper room and the servant girl who was keeping the door was scared to open. She asked, "Who is this?" And he said, "Peter." She recognized his voice. She ran back and she didn't open the door. So they have that separation again, happening again. And that Passover meal that Jesus ate with his disciples and transformed it to the first Eucharist was in a status of separation. There is no more returning of this group to the Israel or Israeli community. They're not going to be part of this. For anyone to join them, they have to come out of that community and be a Christian. So that Passover cleaning of old leaven has pointed to something that's going to happen in the New Testament. When Jesus spoke about it, and I want to go with you to certain passages from the New Testament, he spoke about this leaven. And he spoke about being aware of certain kind of leaven. You might be familiar. I think it is, let me share the screen. It is Matthew 16. Verse 6. So he was with his disciples, done with the day, and they're going to the ship. Then Jesus said to them, "Take heed and beware of the leaven, the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." What's he asking them? Clean yourself of it. Take it out. That's the language. But they couldn't understand. They said, "We didn't take bread, because leaven is found in bread. No man gets out of their house with like a piece of fresh dough in his pocket." They understood leaven and bread, they're synonymous. They are the same. Leavened bread. We didn't take bread. Maybe he's saying, go get bread, but don't buy it from a Pharisee. So Jesus understood and said, "Why are you thinking about bread? Do you not yet understand that? Remember the 5 loaves of 5,000 and how many baskets you took up? I'm not talking about you to take care of food. I will take care of food." And then in verse 11, "How is it you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees?" And then they understood. He kind of said it again with a stress, the leaven of Pharisees and Sadducees, that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And in another Gospels would be the hypocrisy, how they teach each other hypocrisy. I'll tell you, this is very significant. If you think about it, just give it a little bit of time. There was an undercurrent of behavior among the Sadducees and the Pharisees, the two major groups of religion teachers in Israel, the leaders. The undercurrent was, it doesn't matter what you do, just hide it, teach the right thing. So you teach, but when you act differently. Many times Jesus had rebuked the Pharisees for this many times. There's the other gospel says it very clearly that this undercurrent teaching that they teach each other. Okay, they knew each other that they were doing horrible things in hiding, but their teaching and words were appropriate and proper and prestigious, and they said the right thing. And Jesus in one chapter kind of uncovered it completely. When he came into the full clash in the Holy Week before his cross, he just went ballistic against them. "Woe to you, Pharisees and the scribes, hypocrite," he said. "Hypocrites, because you do this, and he uncovered everything." So this is what the leaven is interpreted in the New Testament, and also St. Paul in 1 Corinthians, and it is chapter 5, when he talked about the sin that was reported among the Corinthians about a man sleeping with his father's wife. his stepmother. So he made a judgment, and he said, "You have to cut him out." And then he said, "You're glorying that you're so proud and buffed up is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? When this behavior starts to happen in the church, what do you expect? Therefore, purge," listen to this is very interesting. "Purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened." Why? Because for indeed Christ our Passover was sacrificed for us. So here is the feast of Passover. All over again, he said, when Jesus was put on the cross, all that leaven of hypocrisy, the discrepancy, the huge rift between the actions and the teachings is done with. We could not anymore be part of this community of hypocrites. We are new lump. And since the death of Christ, we are a new lamb. Because in the tradition, once that lamb is killed, it's very much synchronized with the cleansing of the house. Therefore, he said, "Let us keep the feast." Which feast he's talking about? The resurrection feast. "Let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth." So if leaven represents the style of life, the common habits and actions and behavior pattern, then we have to think about this, that our Passover lamb, that is Christ, has been sacrificed. So we have to be, and he's now broadening it up a little bit, not just hypocrisy, but malice. What is malice? The intention to do evil, but under a pretense of peace. Wickedness, and the insincerity, when a person pretend to be sincere, but they're not, that's hypocrisy too. So when we bring this to the preparation of, when we bring it to the preparation of the Eucharist, we understand that piece about examining oneself. Let's examine oneself and see, how are we ready to eat our meal together? Are we going to be part of this community? Are we actually do we know how dear this community to God and what he wants to do with it? That he wants to take it out to the world and wants to make it a holy community, sanctifying it. So the first thing we do is look for that leaven, what Jesus and Paul had spoke about. Take out that leaven, the leaven of the world, the culture, whatever the culture is teaching that is not Christ-like. And we have to examine ourselves, see, are we going with the flow? And in the preparatory, I'm going to finish with this. When we go to the preparation for the priest, and it gives you an idea about the preparation for the people too, and the liturgical prayers. I'm going to go to St. Basil. This is where we have a preparatory prayer. And in this, to setting silent prayers, I have to do that so we can look at the prayer of the priest. And this is the preparation prayer. This actually puts it all together. The priest says in his preparation, "O Lord, who knows the hearts of all, who is holy," that's the beginning of all the promises, "and who rests in his saints, who alone is without sin, and who has power to forgive sins. You, O Lord, know my unworthiness, unpreparedness, and my lack of meetness for this your holy service. And I do not have the countenance to draw near and open my mouth before your holy glory, but according to the multitude of your tender mercies, pardon me, a sinner, and grant to me that I may find grace and mercy at this hour. And send down to me strength from on high, that I may begin and make ready and accomplish your holy service, after your pleasure, according to the assent of your will, for a sweet savor of incense. Yea, O Lord, our Master, be with us, be a partner working with us. Bless us, for you are the forgiveness of our sins, the light of our souls, our life, our strength, and our boldness. And to you we send up the glory, honor, worship, O Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. What's the priest doing here? He is telling God, like the old man did in the house, I've done my best to examine myself. And here in the preparation narrative, we have a little introduction to this prayer. So the priest would have to kind of, and it's not written here, but in the books it says, have to examine himself, see that he is ready and clean, and examine his actions, and he has not have any grudge against anybody or done anything to defile that sacrifice. So that's the place where everybody prepares by examining themselves. St. Paul in the letter to the Corinthians that we read says, before anyone comes to this, let the man examine himself and find if he's ready to take it or not. And this is the process by which we start the approach to our meal of salvation, the preparation and the preparation prayer. I'm going to stop here, and then next time we'll go into the offertory and what the offertory does. God willing, when we come back, at least this one, just before I forget, it also includes our self-examination and confession, of course. When we bring out the leaven and give it to the priest, the sins that we have, and we give it to the priest to be forgiven. And this all has to do with our preparation. No more it's a physical symbol of leavened dough. It's a spiritual reality of life, behavior, heart attitude, position, and disposition. These are the things that we look at when we are preparing for our Passover, for our real Passover. It's suitable to talk about it now, since Jesus, we celebrate his death and his gift of his body and blood and his life and his resurrection. And then it's good that we continue until we reach the Liturgy of the Faithful. I'm not gonna go over the other services, which is the Vespers and the Matins. This might have another time to do, but I'm talking more focused on the Liturgy of the Faithful. Next time, God willing, if possible, we can also bring some fathers from the 2nd century and read a little bit about how they describe to us, recorded to us, the liturgy from that 2nd century. And I've tried to get some from the canons of the church. One of the examples I have that's very vivid from the church constitution, the apostles, they would say the whole church used to take communion. And if someone doesn't take communion among them, anyone, they would say, what is going on? What's happening? Why is this person not taking communion? Is there something wrong among us? They also would close the door, so no one who is not baptized will be available. They will all go out, and the deacons will cry and say, those who are not baptized in the church should not be in the church for the Liturgy of the Faithful, because it's a very specific act. It's not a show, and it is not something that we do on Sunday so we can get on with our lives. It is where we actually have union with God, and it's a very intimate thing. It's almost like the marital relationship between husband and wife. It cannot be done in any place but the bedroom, in the most holy place where they keep it locked, clean, and pleasant. And no one can be there when it's happening. Same thing that Jesus did on his gift of his body and blood. I ask that the Lord will keep us all aware and give us the knowledge of himself and his will, and that we follow what he wants from us so we can actually follow him personally, and not to be afraid. He asks us not to be afraid. Yes, we are separated from the world as his people, but for him and for him to lead us to kingdom, to something much more beautiful, much more glorious than anything the earth can offer. To him is the glory with his good Father and the Holy Spirit now and forever.